Well, hello and welcome to a replacement video that we are doing for our study of wisdom literature. This is the final video that we're going to be having, and so there won't be a live class to watch next week or whenever you watch this video. There won't be anything further after this. This forms the final kind of block of instruction for our time together this term. We'll go ahead and say, and I'll probably say this in the live class tonight, but just thank you so much for participating in this study, and I've really enjoyed it, and hope that you've gotten a lot out of it. We're going to be trying to tackle the entirety of the Song of Solomon in this video. Of course, we will, as we've had to throughout the course, kind of move fairly quickly through this material, but at the same time, hopefully I'll give you some things to think about and some things that will help you and maybe begin the process of getting you familiarized with this book that, again, as we're going to say just a second, is just a book that is just not so frequently touched by people in the Lord's church. So the Song of Solomon, let's start off by getting our slideshow to work and then introducing the Song of Solomon. It's frequently overlooked, as I just said, and ignored to the point of actually shocking people who sort of discover it for the first time. I can remember being a cheeky student in a high school class one time, and kind of shocking my fellow classmates by telling them to go to the Song of Solomon. And that did shock them on that occasion. And at the same time, it wasn't right for me to kind of treat the book that way, nor for them to really be totally shocked by it. I know that maybe you say, well, what are teenagers doing in this book? There are traditions, and I don't know if these are valid or not, that would have us, kind of having young people study this book from the time that they're 12 or 13 and on upward, at least if the Jewish use of this scripture is anything to go by. And again, I've just heard that. I haven't researched it, but I think it's appropriate for us to be preparing people for marriage using this book. And it's also appropriate for us to examine this book as a guidebook in marriage. And it shouldn't be something that is shocking for us rather, because it touches on an aspect of life where we desperately need some instruction, some guidance. It touches on sexuality, it touches on married love, and there's a lot of sinfulness and a lot of trouble that people get themselves in because they're not aware of God's guidance on this subject. Now, Song of Solomon doesn't form the entirety of God's guidance on this subject. There are many other passages that talk about marriage and married love, but at the same time, this is a book sort of dedicated to the topic, and so it should certainly be brought into the discussion. I believe that Song of Solomon is in essence an answer to our need to have information on this subject. God has given us, as 2 Peter 1:3 says, all things that pertain to life and godliness. And so as married love and sexuality is a part of life, we need information on the subject, and God has given that to us in the Song of Solomon. So having kind of given us at least enough to realize that the way we're going to be approaching this book, we'll talk a little bit more about that in detail in just a second. I want to go ahead and talk about some inadequate or perhaps even wrong approaches to the Song of Solomon that I've seen both in commentaries and in discussion, and just want to kind of rule these out in terms of the way that we're going to be looking at this book. Regarding the material within the book, occasionally you'll see the book sort of treated like it was some kind of a drama or some kind of a play in the Jewish community. Now, I will say, and I'll say this again later, that I do appreciate the newer translations identifying speakers within the text and saying, for example, he says and she says and they say, or something along those lines. Maybe even Solomon says and the Shulamite says, and so on. But don't let that fool you into thinking that the purpose of this book being in our Bible is to form some entertainment for the Hebrew community. That's not the purpose of any of Scripture. The Bible was not given for entertainment, but again, for life and godliness. And so I don't want us to be looking at this book and seeing it at some kind of, like Grecian play or Shakespearean drama or something like that. That's not what we have on display here. Number two, we don't see a love triangle in this book. I don't know where this came from. I don't see it in my personal reading of the text. But I was asked this once by a church member, do you see in the Song of Solomon sort of this love triangle and Solomon stealing away the Shulamite from a shepherd? And no, not at all. I don't see that. And I don't think you have anything like that. This is not a romance novel after the modern take on romance. It's not some kind of scandalous story that's just again in there to produce interest in us as readers. It's not there for that reason at all. Next, in terms of its interpretation, so the material, I don't see a love triangle, I don't see a drama or play regarding its interpretation. I also don't see some kind of spiritual allegory or typology, for the sake of being allegorical or typological. You can read, I think it is Adam Clark's commentary on this book. And from the word go, as he's discussing this book, he says the Shulamite is the church and Solomon is Jesus. And he gets to the point where, the book openly discusses in terms of the praise language from husband to wife, the breasts of the Shulamite. And he sees in those breasts the Old and the New Testament. And it's just like, whoa, that's not the way we're meant to be approaching this book. That's not what this book is all about. So no, it's not some kind of allegory. No, it's not merely a study in typology. I know that married love does in some way portray the relationship that Jesus has with believers, and that the husband and wife mirror the roles fulfilled by Jesus and the church. But that's not to be taken, sort of as a lens through which to view this book. This book had value prior to Jesus and the church, and it has value to be considered without considering Jesus and the church. And in fact, even in considering Jesus and the church using this book, you'll be left scratching your head on a number of occasions. And so I don't think that that's a good framework from which to interpret this book, although there may be some value, again, reflecting on Ephesians 5 in that comparison, because again, it's made in the New Testament, but not the purpose of the book. I also don't see in it a love story without moral or purpose. And again, we don't have some kind of romantic novel here, and certainly something very different than what we find in romantic novels based upon the content. So if those are inadequate or wrong approaches to the Song of Solomon, what is going to be our approach? We do have to define this, because our approach is not totally common in the world of interpretation, because, like I said, those things that I've just discussed tend to be the kind of approaches that are used in academia, but they don't seem to fit into a picture of God giving this book with purpose. So a better, I believe, approach, and some that you do see in occasionally in conservative commentaries, is to say that what we have here is an inspired picture of a real and ultimately unique romance between Solomon and a woman. Now, the woman is not named, but she is called frequently the Shulamite, a person, in other words, from the city of Shulam. And so a real, unique romance. And I've highlighted the word unique because you'll perhaps accuse me at times in the way that I'm viewing this book, saying maybe there's something anachronistic about what we see because, for example, I think, and you'll hear me say this, that we have sort of this courtship period between Solomon and the Shulamite in the first couple of chapters. And you say, well, was there really courtship in a situation where, we have arranged marriage and these kinds of things? And yes, I think that's the norm. But I think something unique happened between Solomon and the Shulamite. And I think that God in his wisdom took what was unique and again, brought inspiration to it, knowing that future generations would benefit from this, given the change in the way that people marry over time. I'm definitely one who believes that the Word of God is, of course, written to its original audience and has significance for that audience. But I'm also one who believes that God foresaw future situations and problems and used the Bible as a way of dealing with those problems in advance. And so it's not beyond our God to identify a unique situation happening in the Old Testament and saying, hey, that's going to have some relevance for future generations. It has relevance now and will have relevance then. So a real unique romance between Solomon and a woman is how we approach it. The speaker approach of many modern translations does seem accurate. In other words, to note that without there being any direct indication in the text itself, to note that there is a change in perspective. And so, like, I'm reading in my New King James Bible here, and I see that it says, if you can see this, it might be backwards, but it says like the Shulamite and, the daughters of Jerusalem. And and then you go down here to her beloved, and then the beloved, which I'm going to say is Solomon. And so again, I think that's accurate. I think that's helpful. I don't want to rely upon it too much, because of course, we'll still have to realizing that, just like we talked about the headings of the Psalms, these are even more the product of lack of inspiration, to say the least. This is publishers that have put this in here for the sake of our study. So again, we need to just take it with a grain of salt. But I don't know that I've had a great deal of problem with where there have been identifiers in most of the translations that I've studied from. So anyway, poetic language makes interpretation difficult at times of this book. You're going to find that there are times where, even I'll be, in teaching it to you, scratching my head as to the exact meaning of what's being said, because it's written in a way that has just that special significance for its first audience. But the overall picture to me is clear, and I hope it will be to you as well by the time we are finished with our little overview of this book. We are seeing a book that is designed to instruct on marriage and to also instruct on married love. Okay, so let's answer some immediate objections that might be coming to mind as you think about this approach that we have adopted. You might say, well, who is Solomon to give us advice on marriage? And that's a really good point. Now, we've chronicled this about Solomon, how there was a major departure in Solomon's life, and that major departure was brought upon by Solomon, one, marrying a bunch of women, and two, allowing those women to guide his heart away from God. And so, yes, Solomon is a story of failure as relates to married love, but that doesn't mean that perhaps there was a moment in time where Solomon got it right, or again, where Solomon got it right enough to where God could use it to tell a story, to teach and to instruct. And so, yes, we're not going to uphold Solomon in every way, but we wouldn't do that with any biblical author, to be fair. I mean, all biblical authors are humans. At times they fail. And so, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and realize that there is a reason why this is a part of our Bibles and that God has brought inspiration to it. So, no, Solomon is not a role model in every way, but that doesn't mean that there isn't something special happening in his life at this time that he uses to instruct us. And then the other objection that we'll consider, and if you have any others, by the way, feel free to write and ask questions, but can the Bible really be saying all of these things? Sometimes people are still left wondering about that, feeling as though the Bible shouldn't be touching on this subject, or, that we shouldn't be really discussing it. Well, I'm going to go ahead and say this, and so hopefully you'll get comfortable with this thought that human sexuality is not wrong. And you'll hear us following the book, and it's discussed, and so we should discuss it. So where we need to readjust our thinking is, instead of seeing sexuality as being wrong, we should instead see sex outside of the boundary of marriage being wrong. And so when we have fornication or adultery taking place, that's wrong. But to say that sexuality inside of marriage is wrong is to deny Scripture effectively. There's a due benevolence that's supposed to be given between husband and wife. 1 Corinthians 7:1-5 talks about that. And there's supposed to be love within a marriage. And the marriage bed is to be held in honor, Hebrews 13:4. So a number of biblical texts that would inform us to say, hey, don't assume that God created this thing merely to tempt us. No, married love is something that's beautiful in its time and in its place, to borrow from the thoughts of Ecclesiastes chapter 3, everything is beautiful in its time. Well, married love, or sexuality, sex, is beautiful inside of marriage. So we don't want to be like, my wife told me a story about some friends that she had growing up. And one of these friends said to her that she wanted on her wedding night to remember to be careful to dress modestly, because she didn't want her husband to be lusting after her. And, that's totally wrong. The idea that lusts can take place inside of a marriage, when what we're seeing here in the text very clearly on display is a husband and wife who love and honor each other's bodies. And, it's just very plain that happens. And so, again, right inside of marriage, wrong outside of marriage. Now, it does represent again, a very real romance between Solomon and one of his wives. I think that I meant to put a different quote in there. Actually, I think I cut and pasted that wrong, but I'm not going to fix it right now. We'll just keep rolling here. But what I wanted to say in that spot here, rather than that statement, is that what you're going to note in this book is that even though you find a husband and wife praising each other's bodies, that the book will stop short of describing the sexual act itself. And I think that that's where you would have the difference between a biblical reflection and what ultimately would be pornographic material. This material is not designed to incite lust in us. It's merely designed to show us the kind of things that should be said between a husband and a wife. And so you won't find a description of the sexual act. You won't find a description of the marriage bed, effectively, therefore. And so, again, appropriate discussion is on display here in this book. All right, let's talk about the book itself, and we'll begin our kind of reading of it. And so we'll start off with chapter 1 and verses 1 through 4. I've kind of described this as an opening because I wonder, in reading it, is it sort of a flashback? Is it sort of a picture of, maybe attraction from the word go? So chapter 1 and, verses 1 through 4, we'll go ahead and read it. Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is better than wine. Because of the fragrance of your good ointments, your name is ointment poured forth. Therefore, the virgins love you. Draw me away. What you again have here perhaps is sort of a flashback. I do get the sense, especially later on in the book in chapter 8, that there are changes in kind of the timeline, so to speak. And so there is the potential of interpreting certain statements as though they are said at different times. But having said that, what we could see here is something that is perfectly natural as relates to two people who are considering one another for marriage. And that is the idea of attraction. So attraction is the first phase of love. Attraction is, that desire for something more to take place. It doesn't have to necessarily be something sinful, although attraction can certainly be sinful in nature. And you're going to see here at times the force of attraction in this first couple of chapters, especially the force of attraction being hit with sort of some spiritual breaks. And so we'll identify that and talk about that later. So don't just think that attraction sort of has carte blanche or a blank check in the dating period. It does not. But at the same time, attraction is normal. And, there's something to be said if attraction doesn't take place between a couple of people, especially in a context where we do have the option of, choosing whom we might date and marry. Now, I will say this, and I don't know maybe that I emphasize this enough in the introduction, that we are dealing with a very different world in the Bible than we are dealing with when we think about our world. And our world has its own difficulties and problems. But when you think about, again, the vast majority of marriages that were formed in the ancient world, they were formed by arrangement and family arrangement. And so I think about, in particular, Genesis 24 and the marriage between Abraham's son Isaac and Rebekah. And so how did that marriage come to be? Well, it came to be because a servant went away and basically brought back a wife for Isaac. And so Isaac didn't have a whole lot of say in the matter. We can see that the two of them loved each other. That love was on display when they were trying to hide the nature of their relationship amongst the people of Abimelech. What was that? The herdsmen of Gerar, or whoever that is. Anyway, I can't remember if that's the Philistines or who that is at that point in history, whether or not they're called that or not, certainly in the region of Philistia. But anyway, they do end up loving each other, but they didn't have a whole lot of say in the beginning of their relationship. And so what I want to say now, and I'll if I don't say it again later, is that any God-ordained marriage, and what I mean by that is to say that there are some people that God does not join together in marriage when the laws of the land perhaps do. I'm thinking about homosexual marriage, and I'm thinking about those that don't have the right to be married as per Matthew 19, 1 through 9, and And of course, maybe the situation illustrating that would be Mark chapter 6 and Herod taking his brother Philip's wife. And, even though the text says that he married her, John says that it is not lawful for you to have this person as your spouse. And so God ordained marriages. So you have a God ordained marriage when the will of men and the will of God line up and two people are joined together in marriage. Let me get my point. Any two people that are joined together in God ordained marriage should be able to have a functional, healthy, happy, holy marriage. That they should be able to, because there's no such thing as two people that are just totally incompatible, if they will adjust their thinking and behaviors in their relationship in the way that God instructs. So there's no reason why two faithful people can't have a successful marriage. And so I've kind of chased a little rabbit there with all of that, but I wanted to go ahead and say that, we're dealing with a different situation here. And I think God is instructing about our situation through inspiration in these couple of chapters through a unique situation. But as much as we can emphasize in these couple of chapters that we're going to be talking about, the first two chapters, as much as we can emphasize making good decisions, any marriage has hope if, again, it has been joined by God. And let's get back to my notes because I feel like I have digressed a fair bit with all of that, or at least get back to the text. So looking back, maybe indicative of desire. Attraction is there, though, right? And so let him kiss me with the kiss of your mouth. There's nothing wrong with desiring that, even before marriage. But notice how the attraction is based upon the way that obviously Solomon is presenting himself because of the fragrance of your good ointments. But then notice how there's a deeper reason for attraction. And this is sort of God, again, using this unique situation to teach us something. Your name is ointment poured forth. I believe it is in the New American Standard Version that you have something like your name is like pressed oil. And the picture there of the extracting of oil from olives, the need for pressure to be applied, reminds me of the nature of character, who we are under pressure. And so it should be that, yes, there can be physical desire, but there should also be intellectual desire based upon a name or a reputation. And so allow that to be instructive, allow that to be, guiding as we think about preparing ourselves for marriage. I don't know the situation of all of those of you who are taking this class. I know some of you are married, but then there might be a couple of you that are preparing for marriage, or maybe even are preparing others for marriage. We'll teach them, using this text and talk about how, yes, it's good to be attracted to the person that you're considering for marriage, but there needs to be a deeper reason for that attraction as well. So let's talk about the courtship of these two in chapter 1, verses 5, or verse 5 through chapter 3, verse 5. So the key phrase in this text, you're going to see it crop up a couple of times, is do not stir up nor awaken love. We praise the New American Standard Version in in verse 3 there. We'll go ahead and denounce it at this point, because the New American Standard Version is going to have, instead of do not awaken love until it pleases, it will say until he pleases, and make it seem like there's somebody who's sleeping that we don't want to wake up. And no. It's not my love until he pleases. No, it's love until it pleases. And the idea here is that love in the verses that come up to this phrase is pictured as kind of crescendoing, but the problem is we're not married yet. And so do not awaken the love is sort of putting the brakes on romantic love before it becomes sinful. And so that's something that we've got to teach ourselves as relates to relationships outside of marriage or before marriage. There comes a time when love has to not be awakened. We have to put the brakes on, spiritually speaking, and pull ourselves out of that situation and even sometimes those thoughts. So that's how we understand that phrase. And so it's a key phrase from these first couple of chapters. So the Shulamite is portrayed in this sort of sad way. Like I said, I don't know if verse 4 is a sort of like a flashback or what this is, but you have the king has brought me into his chambers. We will be glad and rejoice in you. We will remember your love more than wine. Makes me think that at least that part is the sort of a flashback. And, chapter 1 and verse 5, though. I am dark, but lovely, O daughters of Jerusalem, like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon. And so even though there's a bit of a self-esteem in saying dark but lovely, she says in verse 6, do not look upon me because I am dark, because I'm the sun has tanned me. It's interesting that you have in this culture a value placed upon being fair-skinned. And in some Western cultures, I've observed it being the exact opposite. We got a kick out of that when we lived in Southeast Asia. It's the same as this text. In Southeast Asia, we would see in the grocery store or in the pharmacy, to be more specific, or like those beauty aisle sections or whatever, there would be, whitening cream. Whereas in the United States and in other Western cultures, there's tanning cream, and it's like, basically the lesson is that people always want to be what they're not, and especially, unfortunately, our sisters, our women, they want to be whatever they're not. And because I don't think there's a whole lot of tanning or whitening cream for men, although that's changing as times change, unfortunately. But the point is that she looks at herself, and she's had some sun exposure, and it makes her feel like she's not as attractive. But at the same time, why has this happened? And here we're getting some insight into how there's character in this woman as much as there's also a good name in this man. Chapter 1 and verse 3. So in this woman, it says, my mother's sons were angry with me. My mother's sons, i.e. her brothers. Her brothers, as we can see at the close of the book, chapter 8, are sort of her guardians. And that implies very strongly that the Shulamite grew up in a home without a father, probably because her father has died. And so her mother's there caring for her. There's constant references in the book to her mother's house, not her father's house. So the dad's gone, and the brothers are sort of taking this care role for her. Chapter 8, we'll show them talking, but here she's reflecting upon the effects of their care. They've sent her out to work in the fields, like one of the guys, and she's gotten a tan, and so. She says, I've had to keep our family vineyards. My own vineyard I haven't kept, and so I've been able to take care of my skin. But in examining that instructively, we see in her sort of this principle that we want to find in good, godly people: submission to authority, and even at times when that authority is less than ideal. So she submits to the rule and the guidance of her older brothers. Wow. Well, there's also this beautiful picture here, chapter 1 verse 7, of the kind of carefulness that they have given her. The brothers say in chapter 8 that they are gonna teach her how to be an enclosed wall. And so we see that in her in chapter 1 and verse 7. Tell me, O you whom I love, where you feed your flock, where you make it rest at noon. For why should I be as one who veils herself by the flocks of your companions? Now you wonder, what is this about veiling herself? And for commentary on this, I think you can go back to Genesis 38 and note how Tamar, when she was trying to deceive Judah, she actually veiled herself. It's interesting how cultural norms kind of change given place and time. In 1 Corinthians 7, we see that in the city of Corinth, there was a value, 1 Corinthians 7, excuse me, I said that, but 1 Corinthians 11, I mean. In 1 Corinthians 11, we see this value placed in the city of Corinth on veiling oneself as a sign of modesty. But in Genesis 38, we see the exact opposite. A person portrays herself to be a prostitute by wearing a veil. And the Shulamite here, though, she says, I don't want to be like one who veils herself. I don't want to look like a prostitute. I don't want to meet you in any unsavory, ungodly way. She says instead, let's meet in public, in the open. And there's the beginning here of this sort of play between, the Shulamite and Solomon, using this sort of shepherding language. I can only imagine that this was language precious to her, and that also was precious to Solomon. Maybe because he heard it growing up. David was a shepherd, right? And so it makes sense that he would have some of these illustrations in this language at ready recall. Anyway, so we find that courtship commences effectively in this couple, and we see a time of growing affection as it should be. If you do not know, O fairest of among women, follow in the footsteps of the flock and feed your little goats besides the shepherd's tents. I've compared you, my love, to my filly among Pharaoh's chariots. And so we see, instead of him preying on her for her own self-image, we see him meeting, her where she desires to be met in the open and public, and then praising her for her beauty. Your cheeks are lovely with ornaments, your neck with chains of gold. And so already as this relationship is beginning, you have this we voice, which sometimes translations will call the daughters of Jerusalem here in verse 11. We will make you ornaments of gold with studs of silver. And so they're excited and wanting to beautify her as this king is seeing beauty in her. But you see here a time of growing affection, like I've said, verse 12. While the king is at his table, my spikenard sends forth its fragrance. So they're eating in the royal court here, perhaps. And she's again picturing the way that she views this man prior to their marriage as a bundle of myrrh that is my beloved to me, lies all night between my breasts, so dear to my heart. Don't view that as sexuality yet, but dear to my heart. My beloved is to me a cluster of henna blooms in the vineyards of En-Gedi. Precious, And again, some of these images are somewhat lost on us because we don't know about the kind of henna that blooms in the vineyards of En-Gedi or any of that kind of stuff. But look past the image to the kind of thing it's imagining, and so he's beloved to her, and she is beloved to him. Verse 15, behold, you are fair, my love. Behold, you are fair. You have dove's eyes. She says now in verse 16, behold, you are handsome, my beloved. Yes, pleasant. But then there's this interesting picture here at the close of verse 16 about where this romantic picture is all unfolding. So we've seen them perhaps in the royal court at his table, verse number 12, and we'll see that again later on in chapter 2 and verse 4. But when they're not there, where are they? Well, it says in the close of verse 16, our bed is green, the beams of our houses are cedar, the rafters are of fir. What is that a picture of? Well, the green would be the grass, the beams, cedar trees, and the rafters, the branches of those trees. They're outside. And I've used this as a way of encouraging people, as relates to the idea of courtship and time before marriage. We want to try to not be in dangerous situations. Romans 13, Romans 13, sorry, and verse 14, I believe it is, or towards the end of Romans 13 there, you can check me. But Romans 13 says that we ought not to make provision for the flesh to fulfill its lusts. In other words, we don't want to give sin a chance. And so you see here a picture of love that unfolds in public, love that doesn't compromise, love that seeks to be the opposite of what is not love. She says, I don't want to be as one of those veiled women, chapter 1 and verse 7. And so they're dating in an appropriate way, courting, or whatever you want to call it. This relationship is unfolding in an appropriate way in public, in the open, with eyes on it. And that's the way that it should be. It's incredibly unwise for married couples, or unmarried couples, excuse me. Didn't say that properly. It's incredibly unwise for unmarried couples to be by themselves. And, it's incredibly important for married couples to be by themselves. That's why I laughed. But incredibly important for unmarried couples to not be by themselves, and to try to put themselves in situations where they're going to do what young Timothy was told to do, to flee youthful lusts. Okay, so affection is growing. You find that instead of her looking at herself and not seeing the value in herself, chapter 2 and verse 1, I am the rose of Sharon and the lily of the valleys, which, by the way, it's interesting how a statement that is clearly a statement made by the woman of this text somehow gets used to describe Jesus. I mean, I don't know if you've heard these hymns before, but there are hymns that actually have Jesus as being the lily of the valley and Jesus as being the rose of Sharon. And it's like, when did guys start getting compared to flowers? I don't know, but that's the Shulamite. That's not Solomon. Anyway, chapter 8 and verse 2. But notice how again we have a singular focus on the part of this man towards this woman. Solomon was, at least this time, focused on one person. Like a lily among thorns is my love among the daughters. That's how we should view the person that we are considering for marriage, and certainly how we should view our spouse. There is no one else that we would view in the same way. Lily among thorns. Courtship should never be a time of secrecy or of shame. So I love how their love is open and playing out in front of others. Chapter 2, verses 3 and 4, like an apple tree among the trees of the woods, so is my beloved among the sons. I sat down in his shade with great delight, and his fruit was sweet to my taste. And so, that perhaps is, again, her benefiting, profiting from this relationship, as we should in a good relationship. We should find that the person we're with makes us better, not worse. But chapter 2 and verse 4, he brought me to the banqueting house, and his banner over me was love. This is not a secret fling. This is a public relationship, and it should always be that way. If we ever feel like we have to hide what we're doing from anyone, there's a fair chance we're doing the wrong thing. I'm not talking about a surprise birthday party. I'm talking about a romantic relationship. Marriage should be had in honor among all. And so there should be no secret about married couples loving each other, and there should be no love between those who feel that they have to keep romances secret. So it's not a time of secrecy or shame. It's a time of mutually benefiting, verse 3. But then it's also not a time of premature sexual intimacy, chapter 2 and verse 5. Sustain me with cakes of raisins, refresh me with apples, for I am lovesick, she says. So she wants to have the effective dark chocolate of her day. They don't have chocolate yet, but they have cakes of raisins and apples, or pomegranates, as some versions say. So this is the love food. She's feeling herself growing in affection. His left hand is under my head. His right hand embraces me. Is she imagining this? Is it happening? I don't know. Chapter 2 and verse 7 is where we get the brakes being applied for the first time here. It says, I charge you, daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or by the does of the field, do not stir up nor awaken love until it pleases. This is not the right time for love to wake up. So, as the relational intimacy increases, chapter 2, verse 8, we find this relationship growing, and it will continue to grow through the text. The voice of my beloved, behold, he comes leaping upon the mountain, skipping upon the hills. My beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag. Behold, he stands behind our wall. He's looking through the windows, gazing through the lattice. And so there's this beautiful little relationship. He's come to see her at her house. And, there's the desire for this ongoing courtship to continue. Come away with me, chapter 2, verse 10. Winter is past, the rain is over and gone, the flowers appear. It's time for this relationship to get going effectively. Before this relationship, it was winter, but now it's spring. Love is blooming, and there's this desire to know each other deeply. Chapter 2 and verse 14. Oh, my dove, in the clefts of the rock and the secret places of the cliff, let me see your face. And I don't, again, think that's to the contradiction of anything that we've said previously. This is not them going to do the wrong thing in some private place, but rather there's a desire to know each other in the deepest possible ways. And but there's the encouragement that perhaps slows things down, which is there in chapter 2 and verse 15. Catch us the little foxes that spoil the vines, for our vines have tender grapes. Something beautiful is forming here, but let's not let the foxes out amongst it. Let's not let little things destroy this relationship, because little things can ultimately become big things. Little conflicts, but then also little decisions that are made without carefulness that lead to big consequences. And so again, Romans 13, make no provision for the flesh to fulfill its lusts. As intimacy increases, you find this, that she's already viewing him as being hers. My beloved is mine, I'm his. Feeds his flock among the lilies, till the day breaks and the shadows flee away. Turn, my beloved, and be like a gazelle or a young stag upon the mountains of Bether. We want love to run. We want love to continue. And you know, but then there's this increasing towards temptation. So chapter 3, verse 1. By night on my bed, I sought the one I love. I sought him, but did not find him. Why not? Well, because he's not supposed to be there yet. They're not married yet in the text. Chapter 3, verse 2. I'll rise now. I'll go to the city, in the streets and the squares. I will seek the one I love. I sought him, but I did not find him. The watchmen say, found him. And she says, have you seen the one I love? Scarcely as I passed them, when I found the one I love, I held him, would not let him go until I brought him to the house of my mother, into the chamber of her who conceived me. You say, what's that all about? It has to do with the way that marriages were consummated in those days. There was a consummation in the family house. And so she wants that to begin, but again, the brakes are applied. I tend to think that chapter 3, verses 1 through 4 is all happening inside our mind. We're going to get a very similar picture in chapter 5 of sort of the same scene playing out in her mind. And so I don't think this is reality. I think this is happening in her mind. And so now they're not married yet, so we put on the brakes. I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or by the does of the field, do not stir up nor awaken love until it pleases. It's not the right time for love to wake up. Okay, but that time comes. And so we have the record of a marriage in chapter 3, verses 6 through 11. And the interesting thing for our minds as we read this is that marriages in the ancient world, and you actually have to know this to interpret some of the parables of Jesus, marriages in the ancient world centered around the arrival of the groom. For us in the Western world, it's all about the arrival of the bride. Here comes the bride, everybody says, and we, here comes the bride. But in the Eastern world, or at least in the ancient Near Eastern world, you have the moment that's important, being the arrival of the man, and so the bridegroom. And so we see the bridegroom coming. How does he come, though? We'll see that in these verses. But before that, let me say this, that even though this is clearly a special day, you notice how the marriage unfolds in like 5 verses here. 6 verses. And so it's not the focus of the book. And that's my caution to those who are preparing for marriage amongst the listeners of this video. Marriage is of so little importance to the rest of your married life. Couples stress and sweat and lose sleep over the day of their marriage, when really they should be putting that effort into the idea of being married. I often say, and I mean it, it's not just for humor, a little bit funny, but that your wedding day ought to be the worst day of your married life. You say, well, that's not the way I think of marriage, but no, here, listen to me. Because every day after should be better. Marriage is about things getting better. And if we're not preparing ourselves to make ourselves and make our lives better through marriage, then it doesn't matter what we're doing in preparation for the ceremony. So as we picture, though, the ceremony, let's see the details that come out. Marriage is led by God. Chapter 3 and verse 6. Who is this coming out of the wilderness? Well, it's Solomon. But notice, like pillars of smoke. Where did that imagery come from? Wilderness, pillars of smoke. That reminds me a lot of the wilderness wanderings and the image of the Israelites being led by the presence of God, the pillar of smoke during the day, right? And again, I can't say with 100% certainty that that's purposeful here, but it's interesting, and I feel confident in making that point. As we're preparing for marriage, we want to be led by God. Number 2, marriage is surrounded by support and protection. Behold, it is Solomon's couch, verse 7, with 60 valiant men around it, the valiant of Israel. They hold swords, experts of war, every man a sword on his thigh because of fear in the night. And so there's people who are protecting this thing and making sure it's happening as it should be. Let's let that be the church for our young people. Let's let the church be a place where married love is something that we are preparing people for and that we are protecting people for. Number 3, marriage is characterized by preparation. We see that Solomon has made preparations. He made himself this sort of wedding carriage, this palanquin, it's called in the New King James, verse 9, but it's the thing that he's sitting on and being carried on. He made its pillars of silver, support of gold, its seat of purple, but he's not the only one that's preparing for this day. Its interior was paved with love by the daughters of Jerusalem. And so, again, others are helping to prepare this day. And ultimately, parents are preparing for this day. Chapter 1 and verse 11, go forth, O daughters of Zion, and see King Solomon with the crown with which his mother crowned him on the day of his wedding, the day of the gladness of his heart. Interestingly, so Proverbs 31, which we've talked about, was authored by Lemuel. You remember us talking about that? And Lemuel is literally translated by some as something meaning something like one who is devoted to God. And there are people who actually see in the words of Proverbs 31 potentially the words of Solomon. And whether it's him or not, we see in that text a woman who was preparing her son for marriage. Remember how we talked about, the virtuous woman's place in that text? I tend to believe that that is a continuation of what Lemuel was taught by his mother. And so isn't it interesting here that the mother is the one who crowns this relationship of her son? Well, anyway, as we continue in chapter 4, we see the honeymoon. And so chapter 4 and verse 1, behold, you are fair, my love. Behold, you are fair. You have dove's eyes behind your veil. Your hair is like a flock of goats going down from Mount Gilead. As you're portraying this, or rather picturing this, we'll go ahead and make the point that the things that are said here are not things to be said verbatim to your spouse. We talked before how there seems to be this sort of shepherding language between Solomon and the Shulamite, and that comes out in some of the things they say to each other. But at the same time, we're seeing a time where they're praising each other. But before we jump into the text, I should have had my PowerPoint come up here and reminding me to say that this is now the time for love to wake up. Chapter 4 and verse 16 says, awake, O north wind. Before it was, do not awaken the love until it pleases. But now, awake, O north wind. Come, O south wind. Blow upon my garden, that spices may flow out. Let my beloved come to his garden and eat its pleasant fruits. So she is inviting her husband to come and to partake of who she is and what she has. And so the time for awakening the love is now. So marriage is that time. Spouses, as we go back into the beginning of the chapter, spouses should love each other's bodies, and they should say so, especially men. We have a world that is constantly surrounding us with negative self-imagery. The devil loves to tear people down, and those working on behalf of the devil love to tear people down. Now, they do it in search of profit. Women are told through basically every advertisement that they see, you're not beautiful now, but you could be if you use this product, if you wore these clothes, if you had this accessory. So women are told over and over again, you're not beautiful, you're not beautiful, you're not beautiful, but you could be. And women have found that as they get these things, that these things don't make them feel beautiful because they're constantly being torn down. Well, men, let's not continue that, and let's instead build them up. Most of what we see here in this text is Solomon praising his wife. Now, we'll say later on, we will see the Shulamite praising her husband in much the same way. So men sometimes need to be also praised in their appearance, but the bulk of material would have the husbands doing that more often. And I think that there's a reason for that in the way that men and women are different. So we find once again, him praising her fairness, her hair. Chapter 4, verse 1. This is really interesting stuff for us as Western readers. Your teeth are like a flock of shorn sheep. You have white teeth, which have come up from the washing. Everyone bears its twins. You don't have any teeth that have been knocked out. and none of them is barren, and none is barren among them. So you're not missing any of your teeth. And the things you take for granted in the Western world. But anyway, your lips are like a strand of scarlet. Your mouth is lovely. Your temples behind your veil are like a piece of pomegranate. Your neck is like the Tower of David, built for an armory on which hang 1,000 bucklers. So things that he values and treasures, he's seeing these in his spouse. Your breasts are like two fawns, twins of the gazelle, which feed among the lilies. And chapter 4, verse 7 is what I want you to really highlight as you think about your spouse, or you're thinking about the way you're going to prepare yourself to have a spouse one day. You are all fair, my love, and there is no spot in you. Well, I guarantee you that is not true. And in fact, we know it's not true because of what she has said about herself in the beginning of the book. You remember chapter 1 and verse 6, do not look upon me because I'm dark, because the sun has tanned me. So she has sun damage. And yet he doesn't see that when he looks at her. And that is not deceitful. That's what love is. Love is looking at your spouse and not seeing the flaws, but choosing to see the beauty. There's no deceit in this, but this is what love is. Love sees the beauty. Continuing this, mutually beneficial married love takes time. Chapter 4, verse 6, until the day breaks and the shadows flee away, I will go to my way to the mountain of myrrh and to the hill of frankincense. And so this time is pictured as a time of climax, of them coming together, and that love being enjoyed, a time of going to the heights, so to speak. But notice how it says until the day breaks, until the shadows flee away. And so married love takes time, and it also requires us, to take time to slow down and note one another's needs and meet those needs. Chapter 4 and verse 8, come with me from Lebanon, my spouse, with me from Lebanon, look from the top of Amana. So he doesn't want to just go to the top of the mountain himself. He wants her to come to the top of the mountain. He wants her to find fulfillment, enjoyment, to make this a good time for her. We see him continuing to pour out this language, which is a part of let's call it the foreplay that takes place between a husband and a wife. He speaks to her and talks about how you've ravished me with the look of your eyes. Chapter 4 and verse 9, chapter 4 and verse 10. You are fair. How much better than wine is your love, and the scent of your perfumes than all the spices. Your lips drip as the honeycomb. Honey and milk are under your tongue, and the fragrance of your garments is like the fragrance of Lebanon. So they're kissing each other. They're spending time with each other. It's a very slow and deliberate thing that they're doing with one another, as should married love be. Married love is exclusive and it is closed. Chapter 4, verse 12, a garden enclosed is my sister, my spouse, a spring shut up, a fountain sealed. Well, not sealed to him. Chapter 4 and verse 16, she wants him to come into the garden, but sealed to whom? Well, to anyone else. And that's the way that it should be. There should be no sharing of the intimacy of marriage with anyone outside of marriage. And therefore, what you see here is a beautiful and a satisfying experience by design. Your plants are, I should say, chapter 4, verse 13, but chapter 4, verse 13, your plants are an orchard of pomegranates with pleasant fruits, fragrant henna with spikenard and saffron, calamus and cinnamon, all the trees of frankincense, myrrh and aloes with all the chief spices, fountain of gardens, a well of living waters, streams from Lebanon. So all these beautiful and abundant things coming in this relationship. We read chapter 4, verse 16, so chapter 5 and verse 1. I have come to my garden, my sister, my spouse. I've gathered my myrrh with my spice. I've eaten my honeycomb with my honey. I've drunk my wine with my milk. In other words, I have partaken, and there is satisfaction. Okay, so that's the way a honeymoon should be. But the honeymoon isn't a time that should end. And so even though there is conflict, there is resolution, and there is ultimately the portrayal of commitment. I thought I changed that. It should say, instead of chapter 5, verse 2 through 8:14, should say instead, through the end of chapter 7. Commitment. In fact, I feel like that whole line is going to get changed in a later slide, unless I didn't save it or something here. We won't stop the video. We'll just discover it as time goes on, but you might need to go back and correct that in your notes. But anyway, conflict and resolution is what we see in chapter 5, 2, and leading into chapter 7. Let me just have a quick look. Here we go. Then I changed it in one slide. I didn't change it in the other. It's just going to bother me as long as it was there. Sorry. Conflict and resolution. So conflict arises regarding sexual needs. And so you find now a very different scene than this sort of honeymoon picture that we have seen, which, by the way, at the close of chapter 5, verse 1, eat, O friends, drink, yes, drink deeply, O beloved ones. There's this encouragement to others throughout the book, and this is how the book will close as well, to participate in love in this way. And so as you're reading here, you're getting this encouragement. This is the way this is supposed to be. But even though this is the way that it's supposed to be, there is always going to be conflict in marriage. So what happens? Chapter 5 and verse 2. Excuse me. I sleep, but my heart is awake. It is the voice of my beloved. He knocks, saying, open for me, my sister, my love, my dove, my perfect one, for my head is covered with dew, my locks with the drops of the night. Unfortunately, as you sometimes see portrayed in sometimes the older television shows, you find Solomon and the Shulamite apparently sleeping in separate bedrooms. This is something that did happen in the ancient world. It doesn't have to happen in our world, but here we are. So they're sleeping in separate bedrooms. Solomon comes to the door. He's knocking on the door. His head is wet. It's raining outside. He wants to come in, but he has more on his mind than just coming into her bedroom. He is hoping to come in and to revisit the marriage bed. And that's apparent from what happens later on in the text. So he comes to her for fulfillment, but that same desire and openness that we saw in the previous chapter in her, we don't see here. Chapter 5, verse 3, I've taken off my robe. How can I put it on again? I've washed my feet. How can I defile them? We get the sense that as they're getting into bed, they would wash their feet and then put them into bed. And she says, I'm going to have to get up. I'm going to have to put on my robe. I have to go to the door. I don't want to do any of that. And sometimes that happens in marriage. Sometimes in marriage, our spouse will come to us either with sexual desire or with any desire, and we will just not feel like meeting that need. And well, what then? Well, we find that very quickly she changes her mind about this. But by the time she's changed her mind and decides to actually meet Solomon's need, he's actually given up, unfortunately, which sadly does happen in relationships. So chapter 5, verse 4, my beloved put his hand by the latch of the door. My heart yearned for him. And so she had previously said, I don't want to get up. But then now she's saying, I want to go and meet my spouse's needs. And so she arose to open for my beloved. My hands dripped with myrrh. My fingers with liquid myrrh on the handles of the lock, and so I was wanting to open up the door and extend a loving hand towards my spouse, but I opened for my beloved. My beloved had turned away and gone, and so he's gone. He's given up. My heart leapt when he spoke. I sought him, but I could not find him. I called him, but he gave me no answer. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes by the time that we're willing to respond to our spouse's needs, our spouse has gotten frustrated and gone off. What should happen when that kind of thing happens in the relationship? Should we just give up? If we're going to have the fulfillment that God wants us to have in marriage, we're going to need to work at it. And thankfully, that's what we see happening here. We see them working at it. Before you can work at something, you have to acknowledge that what has happened isn't what's supposed to have happened. And so here again, we see this picture of her going out looking for Solomon, and then the watchmen are there. But instead of her just asking, like we saw her doing in chapter 3 and verse 3, instead of her just asking them, where is he? We find that the watchmen are actually mistreating her. I don't really necessarily see this as being literal. So she seeks him. The watchmen, in chapter 5, verse 7, they found her, they struck her, they wounded her, they took off her, the veil she put on for the nighttime. That's not to the contrary what we said back in chapter 1, but I think in the nighttime maybe she's kind of bundled up a bit. But there's just this inner conflict and turmoil. And so she says and screams out, I charge you, daughters of Jerusalem, if you find my beloved, tell him I'm lovesick, tell him I've changed my mind, tell him I want to meet his needs and be responsive to him. But then as the text continues, you see this question being asked by the audience that sometimes people ask, why is marriage worth the hard work? Why is marriage worth you meeting needs when you don't really want to do that? Chapter 5, verse 9, what is your beloved more than another beloved, O fairest among women? What is your beloved more than another beloved that you charge us so? Why are you telling us about this and acting like this is something important? Well, now we see how in her mind she goes back to the things that drew her to him in the first place. And we see that she is holding him in the kind of esteem that he holds her. My beloved is white, ruddy, chief among 10,000, his head like finest gold, his locks are wavy, black as a raven, his eyes are doves, like doves rather, by the rivers of waters, washed with milk, fitly set. His cheeks are like a bed of spices, banks of scented herbs. His lips are lilies, dripping liquid myrrh. His hands are rods of gold, set with beryl. His body is carved ivory, inlaid with sapphires. You kind of get the picture here of like one of those Grecian statues of like the perfect man or something like that. And again, love sees this. This isn't necessarily reality, but this is what love sees because love chooses to see this. His pillars are like legs are like pillars of marble set on bases of fine gold. His countenance is like Lebanon, excellent as the cedars. His mouth is most sweet. Yes, he's altogether lovely. This is my beloved. This is my friend. And so she 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 now is seeing her husband respectfully, and she goes back in her mind to the beginning of their love. Chapter 6, verse 1. Where has your beloved gone, O fairest among women? Where is your beloved turned aside that we may seek him with you? We see the value in this, but where is he? My beloved has gone to his garden, to his beds, to the beds of spices, to feed his flock in the gardens, to gather lilies. That reminds us back of the time before they were married, right? And there's this sort of picture of her looking back and just determining that there's going to be love again. And I'm so thankful what we see on the other side. Sometimes when a spouse, admits that they've done something wrong and tries to make it right, sometimes they're not so readily received. That's not what we see in Solomon. We see forgiveness following, and it's not pictured how they forgave each other, how the conversation plays out. We just jump back to Solomon again, and instead of complaints, we've got compliments. And you want your spouse to meet your needs, by the way. Complaints are not the good way to get it to happen. We saw in the Proverbs that the person who dwells with a contentious woman, or maybe even reading it the other way, a contentious man, it'd be better to dwell in the corner of a house than to dwell with such a person. Complaining is not a good way to get anything to happen. Murmuring and complaining aren't to be named among the saints. Philippians chapter 2, was that verses 14 through 16 or thereabouts anyway. So we don't want to be people who murmur and complain. And in the context of marriage, we want to be people who compliment. So complimenting happens. I'll take us up a couple of sips here before we keep going. I'm kind of rushing through this, both for the sake of trying to finish this in a timely fashion and also because I only have so much time here to record this video. But chapter 6, verse 4. Oh, my love, you are as beautiful as Tisra, lovely as Jerusalem, awesome as an army with banners. Turn your eyes away from me, for they have overcome me. Your hair is like a flock of goats going down from Gilead. So there's the some of the old compliments coming out. Your teeth are like a flock of sheep which have come up from the washing. Every one bears twins, and none among them is barren. Some things that he said before, some things that are new now in their relationship. There are other women, evidently, that Solomon even perhaps has in his life at this point. And this is where, again, we remind ourselves that not all about Solomon is upheld. Chapter 6 and verse 8. But at the same time, what he sees in her, the focus that he has upon her, my perfect one is the only one, chapter 6 and verse 9. That's the way it really, really should be. And certainly there are times of ignorance on display throughout Solomon's life. But as God would have it, one man, one woman, one life, and for each spouse to look at each other and say, you are the only one. And so compliments, and that continues. The Shulamite, had wondered what she was going to find in her husband. And, what she found is that love was moving forward as it should do. I went down chapter 6 verse 11 to the garden of nuts to see the verdure of the valley, to see whether the vine had budded and the pomegranates had bloomed, see whether my spouse was going to be a garden to me like I am trying now to be a garden to him. Before I was even aware, my soul had made me as the chariots of my noble people. And so she's galloping on with love, it continued. And you see the audience returning here saying, return, return, O Shulamite, return that we may look upon you. This is so beautiful. We love watching this. And my encouragement to you would be, let's not just watch it. Let's live it. Let's have this be what our relationship with our spouse, let's have this be what it's like. They look at her and him and they say, we see in the two of you this beautiful dance, these two camps of people coming together and dancing as one. Chapter 6 and verse 13 concludes with that statement. Chapter 7, we could effectively call honeymoon part 2. And I love the fact that it's there in our Bible because it reminds us that honeymoon is not something that we get one time in our married lives. We should be experiencing an ongoing honeymoon, an ongoing period of romantic and physical love. Chapter 7, once again, we see them praising each other, praising each other's bodies. And so I don't know that you need me necessarily to read that to you and comment on that. But once again, we see this praising of each other and portrayal of each other's bodies, seeing the good, not focusing on the bad, kissing one another, and just again, if I were to draw a couple of points out of here to reflect upon, I would say, hey, there are times in marriage where you just need to get away. Chapter 7, verse 11, come, my beloved, let us go forth to the field. Let's lodge in the villages. Let's get up early to the vineyards. And so, there's probably some poetic description of married love there that goes on to continue, but it's good for a husband and wife to get away from time to time and, spend time with each other and treasure each other. It's good for you to be captivated by your spouse and to display that, towards others. I hate it when I hear spouses, insulting each other in public, saying bad things about each other. That's not what should happen. A king is held captive by your tresses, by your hair, chapter 7, verse 5. And so captivated by each other, going on trips together. And then it should be that as our relationship unfolds, that there's healthy nostalgia and yet a continual discovering of new things. Chapter 7, verse 13, the mandrakes give off a fragrance. At our gates are pleasant fruit, all manner, new and old, which I have laid up for you, my beloved. The new and the old comes out as the relationship continues. Well, chapter 8, we come to now, and the conclusion, praising both the process and embracing the commitment. So in chapter 8, true love can't be hidden. And we've seen the audience being able to display this all along. There's a little bit of a tip of the hat to some social customs here in chapter 8 and verse 1. It's kind of shocking to read it at first, but I'll try my best to explain it for you. Oh, that you were like my brother, who nursed at my mother's breasts. If I should find you outside, I would kiss you. I would not be despised. You're like, what? Like what? But in those days, public displays of affection were frowned upon. That's still the case in some cultures today. So she says, I wish that you were a sibling so that I could, basically have a public display of affection. But clearly there's something more than that on her mind. She says, I would lead you and bring you into the house of my mother. She who used to instruct me, I would cause you to drink of spiced wine, of the juice of my pomegranate. And so remember that that's kind of a picture of marriage being consummated that we saw earlier in the book. And so, the fact is that, she wants a PDA, but there's more on her mind. And that's the way that it, should be between a husband and a wife, a desire to show affection and to experience married love. But then we see a revisiting of this phrase that we saw earlier. And before marriage, it was met by don't awaken the love. But now there's something a little bit different. in chapter 8, verse 3, his left hand is under my head, his right hand embraces me. Following the Septuagint, um, there's a little bit of a change here in the way that they translate this. His left hand should be under my head, and his right hand should embrace me, is how it is rendered in the Brereton translation of the Septuagint, which is, again, the Greek translation of the Old Testament text that comes to us from the ancient world. So he doesn't care about the PDA, maybe. Maybe there's the idea of them coming together, but you find that previous expression, and this is what it should be. And then you find that statement made about not awakening the love, and you're saying, well, wait a minute, the love has well and truly been awakened at this point. But I think this is her saying, this is the way that it should be. This is the way that it is. And then turning to the daughters of Jerusalem and saying to them, not, as relates to her and her husband, because the love has, like I said, been well and truly awakened, but saying to them, this is the way that it should be. Don't awaken love until it pleases. And there's sort of this affirmation of this process. And so chapter 8 and verse 4, to the daughters of Jerusalem, this is the way that it should be. This is the way that, married love should be. You find this sort of bouncing back and forth here, between the family's appraisal of this relationship, evidently, and the beauty of it. And so chapter 8 and verse 5, this seems to be, and could even be, something said by like a relative, maybe. That's how it reads in the New King James, where it says a relative. Maybe it's even spoken by her mother. I wonder. Who is this coming up from the wilderness, leaning upon her beloved? I wakened you under the apple tree. There your mother brought you forth. There she who bore you brought you forth. I saw you when you were a little girl, but now who is this that's married to this man and who's leaning upon her beloved? Who has she become? And so this family member is saying, wow, there's something beautiful here. Later on, we see how this all began with some brothers, right? You remember the brothers had, in her estimation, been cruel to her in a way by making her work out in that hot vineyard all day long. But notice the protective nature of her brothers and how that set her up for married love and success. Chapter 8 and verse 8, the brothers are talking to themselves. We have a little sister and she has no breasts. So this is a little girl. It's kind of blunt language for us today, I know. But, he said, we got a little sister. She has no breasts. She's not a woman yet. What shall we do for our sister in the day when she is spoken for? How are we going to prepare her, given our dad is not now in the picture? Well, if she is a wall, we'll build upon her a battlement of silver. So if she is a naturally guarded person, then we'll teach her how to be beautiful. And if she is a door, if she is too open with herself and her sexuality, we will enclose her with boards of cedar. They determined that she was going to be a good woman. And so she was prepared to be that for her husband. And so in the midst of all of this is the reality of their relationship, and then further statements made about the effect of that upon others. Chapter 8, verses 6 and 7. Set me as a seal upon your heart. That's what love should be. An everlasting seal, everlasting as long as the two shall both live. Set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm. For love is as strong as death. Jealousy is cruel as the grave. Its flames are flames of fire, a most vehement flame. And you say, jealousy, is that a good thing? But remember Exodus chapter 20, and remember that our God is a jealous God. Jealousy is good when it is reflected of a relationship that ought to be. God is jealous regarding our worship and service. He doesn't want us to serve or worship others. And likewise, within the context of marriage, we should be jealous over our spouse. And then further, verse 7, many waters cannot quench love, nor the floods drown it. It can't be washed away. It can't be extinguished. If a man would give for love all the wealth of his house, it would be utterly despised. Please read that carefully, men. And remember that, your wife doesn't need the biggest house or the biggest bank account. There's comfort in those things, but people in pursuing wealth have done so to the detriment of their family. What your wife really needs is for you to love her. And wives, remember that. I know there's a natural inclination in some women to seek financial security. There's a book called His Needs, Her Needs that chronicles the different needs that we have, whether we're men or women. And one of them for women is that idea of having, financial security, and yet what we want more than that, or what we should want more than that, is again to have true love be there in our marriage. And so you can have all the money in the world, and if you don't have love, you don't have anything. I think, what is the Beatles? They said, money can't buy me love. Yeah, it's true. And there it is in the Bible. So chapter 8 and verse 10, notice how there's a transformation in her. She's become a woman, and she's a confident woman. Before, she had to apologize for herself, but now there's no apology. Chapter 8 and verse 10, I am a wall, my breasts are like towers. Then I became in his eyes as one who had found peace. Confidence is found in this woman. She's been transformed for the better by marriage, and marriage does make and should make those who participate in it better. You find the close of this a little bit of a problematic reading from the standpoint of the poetry of it. And so you read chapter 8, verse 11, Solomon had a vineyard at Baal Hamon. He leased the vineyard to the keepers. Everyone was to bring for its fruit 1,000 silver coins. My own vineyard is before me. You, O Solomon, may have 1,000, and those who tend its fruit 200. And he's like, what is all that? Well, effectively, I think what she's saying here, this is the Shulamite talking, saying that Solomon has many vineyards, but her saying to him, I want you to have this vineyard of me, and you will be the primary beneficiary. But then, as we live out this beautiful picture of married love before others, there will be others who benefit. And so there's this encouragement as the book closes out. You who dwell in the gardens, the companions, listen for your voice. Let me hear it. Make haste, my beloved, be like a gazelle or a young stag on the mountains of spices. Is that a conclusion of the two of them inviting other people to let love run forth and let love proceed in this fashion? Or is it a conclusion of the two of them turning to each other and continuing to long to hear each other's voice, continuing to long for their own love to run away? I don't know, but I think either reflection is beautiful, and certainly what we should see in a marriage. I look down and I see that it says married love crates. That now grates on me. I'll fix that. But again, that's the Song of Solomon, and I hope that you have seen in it something that's useful for you. I know we had to move rather quickly through the text, so feel free to reach out to me if you are interested in this. I do have some lessons that I've done on the Song of Solomon. The recordings are quite dated. My preaching style and teaching style has changed greatly since that time, but I'd be happy to share with you some recordings that I did in the past, about almost 10 years ago now, on the Song of Solomon, if that's of interest to you, and to slow down and think about some of these ideas in more detail. But in the meantime, if you're married, love your spouse. If you're not married, and maybe you're in a situation where you according to God's will shouldn't get married, then love your spouse, love the marriage that God has formed between you and Jesus. And if you are preparing yourself for marriage, prepare to love this way. May God bless you as you do that. We'll go ahead and close out with a word of prayer. Let's pray. Most holy God, we praise you and thank you for this beautiful picture we have seen of married love. We pray for each person who has basked in the glow of the marriage of Solomon and the Shulamite, that you will help each person, including myself, to learn these lessons, to love our spouse, to be, or the one that we have, or to, even though that's not the primary teaching here on display, to love Jesus, to be devoted to him. But we pray, Father, again, knowing this is primarily about marriage, and praying for people to have better marriages, godly marriages, and to prepare themselves to love in the way that you see displayed here in this book. Thank you for teaching us. Thank you for helping us. And thank you for blessing us with marriage. And we offer this in Jesus' holy name. Amen. All right, thank you so much, everyone. And again, this will be our final goodbye. So goodbye, and I hope that you will continue. If you haven't, well, you wouldn't have done so. So please go ahead and commit to finishing this course. Take the final exam. I know that isn't always pleasant to take exams, but just get yourself ready and take it. You'll be thankful that you did, because you'll have this material even more deeply embedded in your heart, and you'll be better prepared for life because of it. I hope that you'll also continue to study using the courses on offer by the Bear Valley Bible Institute there in New Zealand. And I hope that we can see each other again sometime, maybe. I don't know if I'll be asked to teach again. I don't want to take that for granted, but I hope that you'll continue in your studies. May God bless you, and just have a wonderful day, night, or whenever it might be, and certainly have a wonderful marriage. God bless.